Hello, my name is Scott Dahl, and I'm a Master's Program Director and Professor of Digital Marketing and Revenue Management at Roches in Crans-Montana. Welcome to Leading Hospitality Through Turbulent Times. This session will be a presentation of about 35 minutes with 10 minutes for questions at the end. We're taking questions in writing only, and you can submit them as you go along using the chat function. As always, just a quick reminder that these sessions are being recorded and they'll be available on your school's Moodle platform afterwards. I am really looking forward to today's session. Steve Hood from STR Global is here with us today. Steve is Senior VP of Research at STR Global, the hospitality industry's leading provider of hotel performance benchmarking information. For those of you that were lucky enough to catch Steve's first presentation to kick off the series, now you know what I mean when I say it's time for you to buckle your seatbelt and brace yourselves for an avalanche of analytics and insight into our industry today. Feel free to ask questions as we go along using the chat function. And now please join me in welcoming our good friend, Steve Hood.
Well, thank you, Scott. Very kind introduction. I love the avalanche of analytics. I'll use that again if you'll let me. So, great to be with everybody today. And I'm going to go ahead and start by sharing my screen. And here we go. That looking good. And we're going to jump right in, as Scott said, a lot of slides to share, and really some exciting news since we chatted last. Some great signs of recovery beginning to blossom. And that's what I'd love to share with you. So this will be a industry update. How's the hotel industry doing at this point in history? It is obviously a very historic time. We're going to look at performance. We're going to look at some recovery scenarios and comparisons, and then we're going to jump in and talk about the data. So let's start at the very top. We're going to start at the world. Now, this is not a surprise. Hotels have closed around the world, lots of closures. And this world map shows you percentages as of the end of April, just going into the beginning of May. We see hotels in Europe, for example, 76% closed. And I think it was actually a little higher than that in March. Asia at 38%. Now, it was up in the 40s back in March. North America at 17. That's about the peak there. But then look at some of the other areas of the world. A lot of 70s and around the world. So lots of hotels closed. Now, obviously, there have been, the closures have been related to restrictions. Some have been voluntary, but most have been government imposed. And at the end of April, this was basically the countries that had restrictions upon hotels that were actually forcing hotels to close. And if you look at Europe, almost all of Europe is there in red. Now, when we get to mid-May, a lot of those restrictions have been lifted. So just between April and May, look at you're beginning to see a lot of difference. And all of you know from living around the globe that those restrictions are beginning to lift. And that's, of course, good news. Now, back to end of April. Here we're looking at actual occupancy. If you think about it, actual occupancy around the world is normally between 60 to 70% for major markets, even up to 80 and 90%. Where are we at? We're at, in some cases, we're almost at single digits. There have been a lot of places around the world, markets that have been in the single digits when it comes to actual occupancy. But for regional averages, Europe, of course, near the bottom at 11%. Latin America, Northern Africa feeling the pain as well. Now, mainland China, 36. We'll see in a minute. That's up dramatically by the end of April. North America at 24. That's risen just a little bit. Other areas of the world as well. Now, between April and May, look at the difference. Just 2.5, 3 weeks there. North America rises 24 to 32. Mainland China rises 36 to 44. Europe, slower, behind the curve a little bit here, only 11 to 12%. But of course, that's about to open up, I think, and we'll see next time I'm with you. We'll see big changes in Europe, I predict. This sort of bubble chart is a chart of all the markets that we track. We track hundreds of markets, and the color differences are by continent, and you'll see the gray bar in the middle is the average, worldwide average. And this goes from the beginning of January to where we're at right now, mid-May. And you can see on a worldwide average, the world dropped in March. Between the beginning of March to the end of March, total, all those markets just took a dive, and many of them now are down in the 10 to 20% range. That's where we're at now. In terms of countries with occupancies, we just put them in different buckets here. Look at the number of countries that are in the 0 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 to 20 range. Lots of countries in these occupancy buckets. These are actual occupancies. Scott asked me to just pick a couple sample markets around the world, and this is from January to the end of April. Look at some of the countries. Beijing is the red line. That, of course, dove first. So that went down in January, hit bottom beginning of February, just like China as a whole. You'll see that graph in a minute. Beijing, of all the markets in China, Beijing has been one of the slowest to recover. I'll show you that, but you'll notice it's still in the 20s. And we can talk about that. I'll show you other markets as well. Paris, the blue line, that was the one that went down next, beginning of March. That was already end of February, was already heading down. Now you'll notice Paris has been, there's no recovery when it comes to Paris, as we see in all major markets in Europe. No recovery at this point in time. New York was the next to take the dive. That's sort of the green line, and that went down. That was just a week or two after Paris. And New York was it was really the first city hit in the U.S. severely, and it went down to less than 20%. Now, New York has recovered a lot, and but you gotta understand occupancy right now in markets and around the world is complicated because it's, there are a lot of, components of that occupancy. There's, in some places in the world, governments have contracted for, hospital overflow. In other areas, they're being used for quarantine. In a place like New York, the hotels are being used significantly to house medical workers because the medical workers don't feel safe to go home. And that's what we're seeing here in New York, for example. Scott,
hey, Steve, yes. Quick question for you. How are closures being accounted for in that? Obviously, one half of that equation is available rooms. And so when a hotel is closed, how do you guys deal with that?
Yeah, I can get you data, and you can look at it both ways. You can look at our data now based upon based upon current hotels, as well as based upon the total population. So we do factor that in. We have to look at it both ways. That's critical. And I can produce graphs for you if you're working on research or student projects or need to get personalized information. I can get that data for you both ways. So that's important to take into consideration at this point.
That it's actually a question from someone in the group, but as a follow-up, what about do those New York numbers reflect the total, the inventory that was there in January, or do they reflect what's currently open and operating today?
They're reflecting what's currently operating.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Cool.
Now, the yellow line is Rio de Janeiro, and we know that that's been in the news more recently, and that's had some significant issues, and so that'll be an important one to track for the future, and would definitely want to keep our eyes on all this stuff because it's all really relevant as far as the future. Beijing recovering, Paris recovering, what happens in Rio and Brazil. So lots of things to keep our eyes on for sure. Now, I showed you this slide last time. I just wanted to show you where we're at this point. China is back to 43. U.S. is back to 32. Europe is eked up almost to 12%. That is data as of just last week. So when the new numbers are in, hopes would be that Europe is going to be in the 12s, and probably China and U.S. In the 30s and 40s respective, or Yeah, you know what I mean, in the 30s and 40s. So that's where we're at. Let's look at China for a second and see what kind of trends and what kind of things we're learning about. We break that into four different components: the fall, the quarantine, the very slow recovery. Then step number three there, we're beginning to see normal patterns going back. And these are weekday, weekend patterns, and I'll show you those in more detail. But think of it, that's basically weekend travel. Leisure travel, they tend to travel on the weekends and rather than business travel, and it tends to be closer to home, drive to destinations or easy to get to type destinations. Now in the future, we're watching for the corporate business returning, weekday and group business. We're beginning to see some interesting holiday patterns that I'll share with you as well. One of the good signs in China, of course, is the fact that hotels have reopened. And when we were in February, we were hearing from a lot of these hotels that they would never reopen, and that has not been the case. Very high reopening rates. One of the other interesting patterns is the city center versus the suburbs. Look at some of these differences from a premium point of view. This is occupancy. And look at the difference between, for example, Beijing city center and Beijing surrounding. Definitely the surrounding areas are seeing more business in most cases. Now, Shenzhen is an exception to that. And I'm not exactly sure why. We could talk to our China people if you want more information on what's going there. And I think we're doing next week, we do a big webinar, and I'll tell you more where you can catch up with that, a big webinar on China and Asia. So difference between city center and the surrounding areas. You're going to see differences in recovery mode. You're going to see differences between big cities and smaller cities. I'll show you lots of examples of that. Here, for example, is Ningbo. Now, that's a big city in China, and look at the premium between the city center and the surrounding in that as we went into the beginning of March. Big differences there, especially in that holiday time period. One of the exciting things in areas of China, we're beginning to see the comeback of the luxury hotels. Now, as we were going into recovery mode, we saw in a lot of situations that the mid-scale and economy hotels were the ones that were rebounding quickest, but now we're beginning to see signs of the luxury hotels rebounding as well, and that's that's positive news, because that's the return of the transient traveler. I have, if I'm still employed and I have some money, maybe I had travel plans but canceled them, and this might be more spontaneous, but the luxury traveler, you notice between in these time periods, was definitely back during this holiday season. Here's premium, not city center versus suburbs, but here's weekday versus weekend. Of course, weekend is going to be the premium. And in some of these markets, a few of these are destination type markets. You see big premiums between weekday and weekend, and we'll keep watching that, and that'll be an important thing to track in the future. China had two big holidays, one in the beginning of April, one in the beginning of May. Look at the bump. These are some resort destinations in China. For the first holiday in April, look at the big bump there, up to close to 70% occupancy at the lake, and big jump there. That's great news. This particular lake during the Labor Day holiday, that was the more recent holiday, had occupancy at 95%. Now, that would have been totally normal last year, but it's exciting to see that that's actually been the case this year as well. Very good positive signs coming from China. During that same time period, here's Sanya, the big resort area in the whole region of Hainan, 70-80% occupancies in these areas. Now, that's particularly exciting because these destinations aren't as easy to get to. People had to, and I'm not exactly positive how they got there. I can try to find out more information, but people, had short flights, trains. It took, a little more energy to get these destinations, and yet they were filled. So Sanya, here's occupancy, and here's ADR. Now notice this is a percent change, occupancy in ADR growth over time. You'll notice that during May now, Sanya is actually above last year. So the ADR is in growth mode, which nobody would have guessed. But again, this is a resort destination, and that's the kind of thing that where we're going to see these signs of recovery. A couple things from Asia just to share with you, and this was sort of at the worst possible time back in March, as I shared, beginning of March. We see markets in China were down in the negative 90s. Markets in Asia began to see the pain. We have a lot more data on Asia. I shared some of that with you last webinar, and be glad to share more with you. But let's look at some since then. We have some outliers. In this one, we see Singapore and Philippines have definitely been outliers. They have been utilized more for various types of occupancies in their countries, but those have been a little different. They've been performing better above in the 50% range, down different than most of the countries in Asia. In this case, we're looking at just ASEAN countries that have been down to the 20% levels. In beginning of May, we had a big jump in Vietnam. Now, Vietnam, of course, is a country heavily reliant upon tourism, and we're seeing some things opening up, and we're seeing demand returning to places like Vietnam. South Korea, the same thing. Leisure travel came back strong during that holiday season in May, and we're seeing positive signs as well. So definitely business returning in Asia. Now let's take a look at Europe. The first slide that I have here is closures of hotels in Europe, and you can see huge numbers here, 90% in many of the areas, 80s and 70s. Notice it's a little different. Russia has not had forced closures, but other areas, significant number of closures. This was as of the end of April. Now that has opened up a little bit. But here's actual occupancies at the end of April, and look at the number of single digits, and you'll notice you would think maybe certain areas would be isolated, but really not the case. London has remained high at 23, a couple others in double digits, but most of these in single digits. Here's the bubble chart again, just showing markets in Europe, and you'll see that they dropped, as we said before, starting at the end of February. That's when Italy was beginning to see the first signs, and then went down dramatically. Outliers here. Notice some of the outliers are smaller cities, smaller locations. Again, a sign of where people feel a little more confident to travel. These are some of the major markets at the end of April, and you can see big cities in Europe have just been decimated by this. At this point in time, April, things are basically closed down. The purple bubbles are the occupancy percent change. The blue bars are the actual occupancies. Almost, the only one that's above 10% is London. So I shared some of these before. This just shows a couple of the major countries here at the time where they were among the hardest hit. Italy, many of the markets in the negative 90s, occupancy, RevPAR percent change. Sorry, this is occupancy percent change. And here's UK. Here's RevPAR percent change for the Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal, hard hit. Here's the Mediterranean, all areas. Look at that. There's no areas of the Mediterranean that aren't significantly impacted by this. Benelux as well, Central Europe. Look at Central Europe, almost every one in the negative 90s. And here's Germany, negative 80s generally in Germany. That was back in March. Here we compare Germany, Austria, and Switzerland during the March time period. You see, and this is RevPAR levels. No surprise, Switzerland enjoys a significantly higher RevPAR than the other cities. This is, but this is in local currency. And you'll see the drop there mid-March, and very few in recovery mode. Austria significantly impacted more than others. I can get you Austria data if you want to have some data on the major markets going up to the beginning of May. Look at the actual occupancies here. Look at the 5 to 10% occupancy. Geneva, Lucerne, Zurich, all the major cities there, and very few above 10%. Here's Switzerland drop in March and February. The blue lines are the occupancies this year compared to the gray lines, occupancy last year. This is daily data, of course. And then the ADR, you see a bit of a drop as well, and people are watching that carefully. ADR in Switzerland is normally around 250. Notice it's more in the 175 range right now. And that it's, of course, the hotels responding to the drop in occupancy. Here's data during for Switzerland in March, and then comparing March and April. March, everything around 20%. April, things dropping significantly. We still see mid-scale and economy, the highest occupancy there, but of course that's being used by a lot of different reasons, quarantine and government use as well. So that's no surprise. As we look ahead, now remember all the data I've shared up to this point has been backward looking, historic performance, but we also track business on the books. And here's, for example, Zurich and Lucerne looking out in time. This is occupancy on the books. So these are reservations into the future. The Lucerne Festival had a lot of business around it, but it just got canceled. And there's another winter event in February, presuming that will not be canceled, but there's a lot of reservations for that already. And here we're just comparing these two major cities as far as business on the books. So you see, that business begins to pick up in July and August, September, October, all important tourism months in these cities. And we see a fair amount of business on there. So we track that over time. Real quick, Mideast and Africa, again, hard hit. Here's hotel closures in the Mideast, not as significant as other areas of the world, but the absolute occupancy is significant. Now, there are outliers here, Riyadh and Abu Dhabi. I can tell you more about that if we had time. Here's Africa, hard hit here, especially some of the big tourism and gateway cities in the negative 90s. U.S. slow recovery. Notice the bottom was April 11 at negative 84. Last week up to negative 74. So just a 10% increase when it comes to RevPAR percent change. Look at some of the biggest destinations as things begin to open up in the U.S. Notice you're not seeing major markets in here, are you? You're not seeing Miami Beach and Orlando and New York and L.A. You're seeing, destination, smaller destination. Now, a fair number of these are beach destinations, but probably nobody in Europe has heard of Myrtle Beach or Fort Walton Beach. And those are the ones that are seeing recovery. Now, interesting too, look at the premium between weekday and weekend. You realize very few people are going to these places during the weekday. Some tourists are, but the real business is the weekend. These are weekend getaways, transient travelers making it to the beach. Think about it. Everybody in the world has been locked up for 3 months, and people beginning to get out. One of these in the 80% range. So that's what we're beginning to see. Gatlinburg Pigeon Forge is near it's near the most visited national park in the U.S. And keep in mind, that's going to be in it. That kind of travel and tourism is going to see a real interest in this recovery mode. Why? Because, hey, I feel much more comfortable going to a park where I can hike in the woods than going to, a big hot beach destination where I'm, shoulder to shoulder with people that I've never met before. And that's, of course, that's going to be one of the very positive messages for Switzerland, because there's just, there's a lot of that type of travel and tourism. And we're going to see, I think, a lot of Swiss people visiting Swiss destinations and nearby. Trains are still, relatively operational, and that'll be a positive sign. But think about the types of locations that are seeing these positive signs. Here's just, this is from the worst week moving back up. You see slow improvements by class. In the U.S., that kind of data is available anywhere, so don't hesitate to let me know. Big cities in the U.S. now getting up to about 20 to 30%. At the worst time, we were looking at 10% for most of these cities. Group business, now that group occupancy is at negative 87. It was about negative 97, so it's crept up a little bit. That's group business, meeting and events. Most of these are going to be small groups. A group is defined as anything 10 or more. Conferences, conventions, we know they're canceled, but small groups, still a little bit of business. And then Americas, we see numbers around North America. We see Central America, a typo there. And then Latin America, South America, beginning to see more on Brazil. And I don't have that. I can get updated data on Brazil, but that's some of the impact in those particular areas. So good. Let me pause for a second. Catch up. Any questions at this point, Scott? Keep moving.
Sorry, was fumbling for the mute there, Steve. There was really only one question, and that was, do you anticipate the curves kind of being the same? In other words, if you just sort of staggered them all properly so they overlapped, or would you expect, now that it's becoming more of a sort of a global solution, I guess, or we're starting to look more forward towards a global solution, would you expect now all of a sudden to see sort of quicker recovery in some of the markets that have dropped more recently?
Yeah, I think the curves are all going to be different. It'd be nice to say that they, they were all going to be exactly the same. It's not going to be as simple as that by far. But you think about all the variables related to those recoveries. I was talking to somebody yesterday about Hawaii. No way to get to Hawaii if you're not on a flight. And right now, those are locked down. So, how's that recovery going to happen? And Europe is not too different than that. I'll show you some data in a minute. Sure, that's probably a good lead into some of this data that I have here, talking about all the various variables. But it's a good question, and let's go there. Perfect lead in. Recovery. When, how, who, why, where. What is it going to take to get people traveling again? Well, obviously, the first step is government restrictions, and this shows you, from our, the best of our ability to put together data. This shows us where we're at for major countries in Europe, and things beginning to open up as we shared. Things opening up a little bit in Switzerland as we were chatting about earlier. Governments under a lot of pressure to jumpstart tourism. Why? Because these organizations like the Swiss Hotel Association and the American Hotel Association, they're putting pressure on governments to say, hey, you're killing us, and that indeed is happening. So a lot of pressure on governments all over the world. Air travel. We've seen how air travel has just been decimated by this event, but we're beginning to see different companies sharing their plans of reopening and what's it going to take to get back to capacity, and it's going to take some time. This is a realistic view. It's not the best news, but they understand it's going to take some time. Now, who's traveling, why they're traveling? As I shared before, the domestic travel is going to happen first. It's that drive-to destination, easy to get to, local, accessible. It's going to be, the smaller destinations, like we shared, the suburbans rather than the big cities, the small cities rather than the major metro areas. And just as we saw the list of some of those beaches, places that we're going to recover, places that we'll see earlier recovery will be places that you haven't heard of before. But even for the students involved, those are the kinds of places that'll be more apt to be hiring quicker, and they'll need you back sooner than later. Weekend travel is already seeing signs of recovery compared to weekday. That will take a little more time. Companies are not, the business people are not back on the road generally traveling yet. In big numbers, so that's going to take some time, and of course that's going to impact the hotel class variations. And last time I shared some slides on the differences between OC and ADR group versus transient, and those were significant. We can maybe pull those up for next time, but the transient travelers are going to get back quicker. If I may be tempted to go back to a luxury destination that I'd stayed at before. It may be expensive, but I want to go back, and especially if it's at a premium, if I can get that for a discount. And so that kind of thing will be going on, and we'll be watching that carefully. Here's some data on markets in Europe and the percent of travelers that are short haul versus long haul, and you can see the short haul are at the top, more domestic travel. Those small, and you'll see up there more smaller cities up there. So not the Amsterdams and the Londons and the Copenhagens of the world, more the smaller destinations, the Manchesters, the Edinburghs and Sheffields of the world. Look, positive news that we were sharing in April. Airbnb sharing signs of rebound in terms of recovery and business on the books. This is a tourism official from Algarve and sharing about summer bookings picking up. And Algarve is a perfect example. I was on a webinar 2 weeks ago with a bunch of professors from Portugal, and they were saying, Algarve is really picking up. But think of it, drive to train destination from Lisbon and from Madrid, easy to get to. So instead of people from those places going, to Greece or, further, easy to get to the Algarve, go back and enjoy a little bit of a smaller situation there from a tourism point of view and viewed as a more COVID safe destination. Positive signs in the UK. These were recent bank holiday weekends. Look at some of the big numbers when it comes to bank holiday weekends. These were people, getting out of the big cities, going to lake districts, going to the beach more, and positive numbers there. Business on the books for major markets in Europe. We see a fair amount of business for July, August, September, October, moving into the fall. When we look out, we are seeing cancellations coming in, and the change in business on the books is normally called pickup, but when it's negative, it's called cancellations. And so, little bits of cancellations going on, but still a fair number of business on the books. So when we look out far, the business on the books this year is comparative to the business on the books last year. So still some hope that this is coming back strong for the summer and the fall. Recovery profiles. People tend to look, everybody's thinking about what this recovery is going to look like. You saw a few examples there. When we looked, for example, at China data, we saw the downturn. We saw, a beginning of a recovery. There could very well be a drag time period where it takes a little longer. Now, could be a release. Some people say it could be a second wave. That's just a possibility, not for sure. It could look something more like this, where it just drags for a while and then fully recovers. And from a Europe point of view, we're looking at more of a U-shaped recovery here, as you can tell, reaching, and this is this is RevPAR type data, but reaching a bottom towards the end of this reaching a bottom at 2020, then recovering up, almost back to normal in 2021, reaching fully back to normal in 2022. We look back at a lot of data, especially in 2009, and this is something we can spend time doing more. This shows Europe compared to Germany, Austria, and Switzerland in that prior recovery. Austria is had some more challenges during this time, but you'll see Germany recovered relatively quickly in the 2009 situation. Switzerland had some other things going on that caused a bit of a drag, and this is GOPAR that we're looking at during that prior time. So profitability will be something we look at. Takes a little longer to look at that, but that's definitely something we'll be looking at more in the future. As far as resources are concerned, I mentioned the STR website has a COVID-19 page, and webinars will be on there. Upcoming webinars and recordings of past webinars are all on there. So the upcoming webinars, there's 3 upcoming webinars right now. They'll be taking place this week and next week, so you can keep up. The webinars now that the STR folks are doing around the world are a little more focused on certain areas, so that can help. HotelNewsNow.com, our sister company, is almost every article on there is COVID-19 related, and that's a good resource as well. And then, of course, our program, the Share Center, can help you when it comes to data. We do lots of things, but data and online training and certifications and things like that. Your professors know how to get in touch with us. If you have a student project, this is a great examples of project possibilities. So don't hesitate to reach out and take advantage of this data. If you're interested in seeing more about the kind of trends that you're looking at, definitely let us know, and we'll be glad to help there as well. So good. That's it for me, and I'm pretty close to time. So
I was going to say, thank you. At this point, I think avalanche of analytics and insight is probably a pretty fair statement. And feel free to use that, by the way. I did hear you say that. No, not a problem. That's yours. I steal from you all the time, so it's certainly fine. There was one question, several questions that kind of really you covered with the information that you talked about, but there's one question that's actually quite interesting, definitely from someone that understands your business model. I think probably more than the average person listening right now. I'm a little suspicious it might have come from one of my colleagues even, but it says that whenever there's times like this, that there's a downturn, it leads to some business failure, some of the less stable businesses. But at the same time, that creates opportunities, right? And so you guys, as suppliers of information to developers and financiers of hotels, are you seeing an uptick in requests for information yet that would indicate people are starting to sniff around some of those opportunities?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a crazy question, by the way. It's a great question, but whoa, this would be like from a bunch of industry experts kind of a question, frankly. But anyway.
Yeah, no surprise. As unfortunate as this event is, it does make it clear how critical data is. And I was in a conversation recently with a small tourism organization in in a state in Tennessee. I mean, in a state in the U.S. And they realized they realized they really needed data to be able to navigate this particular event. And so they never, prior to this time, they never thought data was quite that important. Well, if everything's going great, you don't need it. If it's going, if you have a problem like this, it's significant. I remember back to 9/11 in 2001. We were just launching our program that collected daily data, and we launched it in about 1998. And so it was going along, 99, 2000, but there were some major holdouts in terms of companies. Well, when 2001, when 9/11 hit, those major companies were the first ones knocking on our door because they realized we need data to be able to navigate through this event, and we need to see what's happening each week. We can't wait until monthly. And so it definitely becomes critical and just, for professors as well, research, students, projects, you begin to see the value of this. Students, this is, you're going to be competing in the very near future when it comes to finding a job. And having that kind of big data analytics experience, being able to walk into an interview and pop open a laptop and show, hey, this is the type of data analysis I've done. Wow, that's going to make you stand out, and they're used to that. They see the need of that during this time. So that's a plug for Scott and everything he's doing. So definitely important.
Do me a favor, Steve. Real quick plug for Chia while you're at it.
There you go. That's our certification in hotel industry analytics. We didn't really think about that. Professors like the ones you work with were the ones that came to us back, and this was a long time ago, back in 2012. They knocked on our door and they said, Steve, we need some sort of industry recognized stamp of approval that my student knows the terminology, they know the methodologies, the formulas, the metrics, they know the data, they understand the reports, they can use that stuff. We need that. And so we responded. We worked with professors just like yours to be able to create that certification and to really answer the need. And that's the CHIA.
It's literally become one of the most widely recognized industry certifications around. So thank you for putting that together. Okay, so let me shift gears on you a little bit. We've used your hotel industry expertise. You've told us a lot about analytics today. You've shared a lot of great information about hotel performance, but you alluded to something that I think probably is relevant to a lot of our students because, as you mentioned, it's the most visited attraction in the United States, but it's kind of close to you, so you can speak to it a little and you can tell them about it. But it's not Disneyland, it's not Universal, it's not any of those places, right? What were you talking about specifically?
That place in Gatlinburg is the national park is the Smoky Mountains, and it has a bunch of small attractions. One of them is named for and owned by Dolly Parton, and you may not know her. She's a country music singer. And there again, this is we're talking in the U.S. We have this term redneck, the country, country people. But in the 2009 downturn, I always joke about the fact in the 2009 downturn, where every area of the U.S. had negative performance, this was the only area submarket out of 650 that had positive numbers. Why? Because, hey, it's a drive-to destination. It's on the East Coast, so you can drive there from Washington, D.C., from Atlanta, even from New York, and you can get there. You can spend a weekend or a week in the mountains, hiking, tubing, fishing, and you're not interacting with people, and it's economical. And you can go see Dollywood is the name of the attraction.
That's right.
And
thank you.
And but that those types of destinations and students, when you're thinking about, keep that in mind when you're thinking about going places. Don't think about the big group meeting hotels yet. Think about those type of boutique destinations. My daughter works at one similar to that. It's Blackberry Farms, and again, a small destination. You can go there, commune with nature, and those are going to be the types of ones. Even smaller beach destinations are going to be the types of ones that are going to begin to see that travel come back. All the surveys that I've seen, lots of companies do these travel intent surveys. All the signs that we see as far as travel intent is that there's a lot of pent up demand. People anxious to get back to travel. In Asia, they have a name for that. They call it revenge travel. And I had no idea what that meant, but it really refers back to pent up demand. And I think we're going to see a lot of that, but it's not going to hit, it's not going to hit the Fontainebleau in Miami Beach. It's going to hit the, Watercolor in Seaside. And those are going to be the types of hotels that are going to see that business come back quickest.
So not Hollywood, not Bollywood, but Dollywood, right? So I think we're up against our time, but Steve, it's always we always learn something. I think probably some people didn't expect to learn about the Dolly Parton theme park, but hopefully they've learned a little bit about that as well. But thanks for shedding light on what's going on with the industry. Thanks for having that information available, really, to kind of give us hope that already things are starting to look a little bit better. I think if we had talked about a tangible recovery a month ago when you were presenting to us, I think there would have been a lot of skeptics. So it's really, really nice, as you mentioned, the value of data. It's super powerful to be able to see that and really and support it with data. So I want to thank you on behalf of all of our students. One final word. We're going to see you again in a month, but one final word, Steve, for everybody, and then we'll sign off.
Best of luck to everyone. Definitely keep in touch, and yeah, definitely look forward to coming back again. And at that point, think of it, a month from now, I think we'll begin to see signs of recovery in every area of the world. And I'm hopeful that more good news to share.
Excellent. All right. Well, Steve, thanks so much. So on behalf of Steve, on behalf of the faculty of La Roche and Glion, again, thank you for joining us for leading in hospitality through turbulent times. And we'll see you guys all again soon.